Welcome to How Deep Learning Contributes to Effective Cyber Team Performance. Just a couple of housekeeping things before we get started, and then I'm going to turn it over to our presenter, Scott, for the webinar. So first of all, yes, we are Rangeforce. I think most of you are familiar with us, but if you're not, we are a cybersecurity training company that provides true cyber readiness for cyber teams. We are recording this session, and so if you are here, you will be getting a recording. Also, if you have to drop off early or anything, you'll also be getting a recording by email, so keep an eye out for that. And we will have a Q&A, so we will do a live Q&A after the main presentation part. Feel free to put questions in at any time into the chat box, or of course you can ask them at the end. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to our presenter. Scott is a senior solutions engineer here at Rangeforce, and he is a great presenter. So I think you guys are really going to enjoy this. And with that, Scott, over to you.
Thank you, Rachel, and welcome everyone. Thank you for taking some time out of what I guess is a very busy day for you all to sort of join us here on this webinar. Hopefully you're going to find this engaging as we go through, and you'll hopefully go away a little bit wiser, shall we say. So first of all, just to sort of cover off a few things here, the purpose of the webinar today, obviously the title, How Deep Learning Contributes to Effective Team Performance. What we're going to be talking about here is how sort of knowledge and skills have a tremendous positive effect on a team's performance. We'll cover off some of the areas in which performance increases, followed by how this sort of knowledge and skills can be gained, but more importantly, how that skill and knowledge can be retained, which I think is a thing that's often missing out of sort of training solutions, and something that I'm quite keen to sort of try and get across to you. So when we talk about deep learning here, you may have come across the term deep learning referred to with AI. It's a slightly different subject matter to what we're talking about here. We're talking about deep learning here as a method, shall we say, or a process for deeply embedding knowledge and skill. This allows this knowledge to be retained and then applied on demand over time when needed. As I'm sure you're aware, in cybersecurity, you're not necessarily going to be using that knowledge straight away. You might learn something and not need to refer to that for maybe a number of months, a number of years even, until that sort of problem arises. So that knowledge retention is a key thing as well. And in fact, if you look at this, we not only do we need to sort of learn the new skills with new threats coming out on a daily basis, but remembering those old skills. As an example, whilst we're researching to put this webinar together, I noticed SQL injection, first discussed, believe it or not, in 1998, and is still one of the big contributors to most attacks these days. So you can't afford to forget anything you've learned in the past. We need to continue learning new skills against new attacks and new threats while still maintaining that old skill level to allow us to effectively deal with anything that could come our way. So as the title suggests, some of this is about how this makes a big difference to teams. So obviously, it's not just about sort of an individual learning these skills and being able to apply them, it's how these impact on a team. So I think the key thing here is a knowledgeable team is much more than the sum of its parts. 5 individual people are not as powerful as a team of 5 people when they're skilled and knowledgeable in the areas they need to work with. And some of the areas that this will affect, and this is not based on ours, this is based on research, increased efficiency and productivity. A skilled team who are proficient in their roles are able to be much more efficient and productive and complete tasks much more quickly, reducing the time and resources required to complete those tasks, whether that be projects, day-to-day work, etc. Crucially, in cybersecurity, this tends to lead to that lower mean time to detect, mean time to respond, mean time to contain that is vital when dealing with any kind of cybersecurity issue. Skilled teams normally deliver much higher quality output. So again, working together with those skills, they can deliver much higher quality output than those individuals on their own. That knowledge and experience contributes better decision making and problem solving, essential skills when working in that high pressure situations, such as dealing with an active attack. You don't always have time to think, You need to be able to react to whatever's going on and draw on those skills and knowledge that you have to be able to leverage everything available to you. Innovation and creativity is driven by skills and knowledge. If you have the skills and knowledge to deal with the situation, you can easily sort of pivot on that, really helping you to sort of innovate, come up with new ideas. And again, that sort of team being more than some of its parts really helps there. So having a number of knowledgeable people who can share ideas and bounce ideas off each other really helps to increase that team performance. Adaptability. Skilled professionals will be able to adapt to changing circumstances. Again, something that you will be all too familiar with in a cybersecurity environment. What's happening now is not going to be what's happening in 10 minutes time or half an hour's time. You're constantly having to react to a new situation. Better communication. Now, I'm sure you're aware communication is key when you're dealing in a team and within cybersecurity. The more skill and knowledge these team members have, the better they will communicate with each other and understand each other. Clear and concise communication will enhance that collaboration, reducing misunderstandings. And this is a crucial skill that we've seen when we run team exercises in our cyber ranges, where teams that work together and communicate well can handle a situation much better than where the teams are just doing their own thing. So that communication and effective working together. Problem solving, and this comes in hand with what we've already spoken about sort of innovation and adaptability. But working together as a team with that shared pool of knowledge to be able to solve problems quickly, navigating challenges efficiently, minimizing the impact of an obstacle on a project timeline, for example, or dealing with those attacks that we have to deal with on a day-to-day basis. Again, reducing that mean time to detect, that mean time to respond, that mean time to contain, all critical elements when dealing in cybersecurity. A key area, I guess, for some as well, or for a lot, is increased morale and retention. We all know how much of a problem it is to find good people and keep good people within cybersecurity. The more we can do to build out that morale, retain staff, the better. And by being part of a skilled and knowledgeable team, where you're all contributing, builds that teamwork and helps to retain good staff. And professional development. Teams where you've got skilled individuals, knowledgeable individuals will learn off each other. Nobody knows everything, but if you're already skilled in a certain area, then picking up something else is much easier. And that growth and improvement across the team you will see develop over time. Now, as I said before, this is not our ideas on what helps a team. This is based on research. There's been a number of studies carried out in the past. One particular example that I came across while sort of putting these slides together was the book, The Fifth Discipline, The Art of Practice of a Learning Organization by Peter Senge. And this actually goes into talking about team learning and how the skills of groups of people look at the larger picture. So there's lots of research around this. You only need to go to a quick Google and you'll find there's lots of information. So certainly backed up by some science there. So now that we know what those benefits are, how do we get there? Obviously, you've hopefully got a team of people. They've surely already got skills and knowledge, so we need to build on that. So how do we get there? Well, there's numerous ways that a cybersecurity professional can gain these skills. There's training courses, there's webinars like this one, there's online research, there's platforms like the Rangeforce platform. There's lots of options out there, so it's just a case of finding the one that fits and utilizing that resource as best possible. And I'll come on to how we can do that a little later in this presentation as well. But the key thing really is how you retain that knowledge. I've always loved this quote from the famous Homer Simpson, my hero here. Every time I learn something new, it pushes some old stuff out of my brain. I know that's not quite the case, but I get that feeling myself sometimes. I'm sure my wife would agree with that as well. But obviously, that's not actually the case. Now, believe it or not, there was an answer to this, first developed back in 1885, quite a long time ago, even before I was born, and I'm quite old. What was this? Well, a guy called Hermann Ebbinghaus, he did a publication called On Memory, which later translated to a contribution to experimental psychology. Sounds like a riveting read to me. And in this, he sort of came up with this idea that we're going to be talking through shortly. This idea is based on an experiment he did, and we'll come on to that. So just to give you some background, Hermann Ebbinghaus was a German philosopher, psychologist, sorry, who pioneered experimental science in study of memory. Now, one of the key things out of this is he actually carried out an experiment on himself where he was memorizing nonsensical syllables and then trying to recount them. And what he found whilst doing this was that over time, his ability to recount those syllables would decline. If he carried on sort of going through them on an hourly or daily basis, that would improve. And what this led to was the discovery of something called the forgetting curve. Now, what we've found and what science has found with the forgetting curve is that in general, most people, if you teach them something new, will forget about 25% of that within minutes or hours. And that decline continues if that material is not revisited and reinforced as you go along. This suggests that if you send someone on a training course, for example, 5-day training course, by the end of that course, they will have forgotten at least 1 day of what they learned while they were there. And this is one of the reasons that when you do training courses that you will actually find you'll cover a subject and then there's revision questions and then there's questions at the end of the day to take you back over what you went through. It's there to try and reinforce that retention of information. Now, one of the other things that came out of this, following on from that forgetting curve, was a way to combat it. And that's something called spaced repetition. Now, spaced repetition is a learning technique that involves reviewing information at increasing intervals over time. The idea being spaced repetition is to distribute study sessions across time rather than cramming all the information into one session. This is based on the psychological principle that spacing out your learning and repetition over time improves long-term retention. And again, this is not the only study that came up with this idea. You'll see again, if you search online, there are lots and lots of studies being carried out on this. I think there's one by a university that I saw the other day where they had students do a subject and then take an exam on it literally within an hour. And then they had other students who did the subject, did the spaced repetition long times, and the results were just so much higher than trying to just cram it in and remember it. So the forgetting curve and spaced repetition is there. So what does spaced repetition look like? Well, as I said, the idea here is to keep repeating or revisiting the information that you found. So what scientists have found here is looking at the forgetting curve there in black, starting at 75% almost immediately, and then declining down to, I would say, probably about 10% over time. By reintroducing that information into the brain, going over revision and restudying a subject over a number of intervals of increasing length or increasing interval between the study periods, you will see an increase in the amount of information that is retained. And again, backed up by a number of studies here. So how does this work? Well, let's just have a look. So the idea here is, first of all, you learn some new information. Now, one of the key things for me and that works for me is learning small bite-sized pieces of information. Doing sort of a lot of study in one go makes spaced repetition a little more difficult anyway, because you've got much more information to go through. And I tend to find I learn much better in small chunks. But once you've learned that piece of information, the trick is to review it at suitable instances. Now, some of these studies have said sort of a few hours, a day, 3 days, 5 days, 14 days, right up to 9 months, with increasing gaps between them. But the key thing really is to be adaptable on this. So you do your review, you test your knowledge, and you review your results. So can you recall that information? If you find you can recall it easily, you can space out those intervals a little more. If you can't review that information, or sorry, recall that information easily, then step back into the review intervals and go over that again. And this is a very similar process to what you see with people using traditional flashcards, for example. The idea being, if I can recall information on one flashcard, I can discard that. If I struggle, I put it back in the pack and work my way through. So that's a similar principle here. Once you've gone through that cycle and you're happy that you can recall that, you can start incorporating new material. Now, the reason we bring this in is one of the things that Emminghaus found when he did his studies was it was much easier to learn new information is if it was related to something you already knew. So by introducing new but related content in small pieces, it allows this curve to continue, this cycle to continue, building up those skills as you go. So you can introduce that new material. You can actually introduce that material a little earlier in that cycle as well. So there's an overlap, and that also helps. And then final step, repeat, learn something new, and go through this cycle again. Now you can have multiple cycles going at the same time. If you imagine a child at school who's studying different subjects, they're going to be going through different cycles at the same time. That's not a problem. But it's just managing this to suit your personal needs and breaking down to those small bite-sized chunks that you need. So now we have the process. What are the key ingredients to this? What does any organization need to be able to implement something like this? Well, first of all, we need a team. Without a team, everything else, you can't really do anything. You've got to have a team of people to train. You need some learning resources. As I mentioned, that could be webinars, it could be online training and hands-on training like Rangeforce provide. It could be classroom training. It doesn't really matter. You need to pick what fits best for you and your team. And probably most importantly of all in any of these things is time. The team need time to train. And this is not just time to go on a training course of 5 days. They need that time to do that spaced repetition and revision to reinforce that knowledge. And this is the bit that often gets missed. People go on a training course, they come back to the office, they work flat out without any time to revisit that. And that leads in really to the common challenges that we see as well. Pretty much the common challenges are the same as the ingredients. The challenge is having enough people and the right people. It's having access to those learning resources, and it's having the time to do it. There's also one other thing to factor in here when we look at the spaced repetition side of things, and that is it engaging enough for the team? Are they going to want to do that spaced repetition, or are they going to get bored reading over the same material over and over again and not really retaining it? So one of the key things here is to make sure that that learning material helps combat that boredom and encourages the team to engage with the material itself and continue to learn and embed that knowledge deeply. So what's the Rangeforce approach to this? Well, the Rangeforce approach is we do bite-sized training. Our modules are sort of 30 minutes average. Some of them are 10 minutes, some of them are a little longer. But the idea being here that we can get the people up and running quickly and learning these bite-sized pieces of information, which are also very easy to revise. We provide that material that you need. This is provided in the form of online modules. There is some theory modules. There are interactive modules where you're working with real problems on real machines. And there are also challenge modules, which are designed to put those skills to the test. These modules can be taken as many times as you like, which means that you can follow that spaced repetition by revisiting the material. And the challenge modules help solidify that by making you think through it as well. So they're a great thing to put in towards the end of that revision process. Obviously, the third point, team, we can't give you more people. We can help you with recruitment. Part of our platform will do so. You can use the platform to review candidates. That's beyond this webinar, but it's there if you need it. This all hopefully results in a happy team. They're given the time to learn. They're given the resources to learn with that they enjoy using and find engaging, helping you retain that team, helping you improve their knowledge and skills, and crucially reducing things like MTTD, MTTR, and MTTC. So to give you an example of what this could look like, using spaced repetition with the Rangeforce platform as an example, and This is just an example. You can do this with any other learning that you have available. I've taken just one of our modules here, Introduction to Email-Based Threats. And you can see down the side there's a number of topic areas that are covered in that. I'm not going to bore you by making you read through those or by covering all that content. What I want to do here is show you an example of how that spaced repetition could start and build out. As I mentioned before, this could extend out much more than 14 days and is likely to do so to really solidify that knowledge. But as you can see, the idea is you're not going to go over the entire content in one go. We're going to go over bits. The science behind this is that as I do each piece, it will help me also recall what I did before. So breaking down into small chunks, doing that repetitive review of that content and seeing how that builds out. But again, don't just take our words for it. We have a number of case studies available. We have a large number of very happy customers. One of my favorites here is Dataport. There is a video case study on our website for this. But the reason I like to bring Dataport up is Dataport wanted to build out a SOC. They're a managed service company out in Germany. They wanted to build out a SOC capability. They soon became aware of the difficulties in recruiting good SOC analysts. Their view was, right, let's take our IT team and let's train them up. And they did so. They didn't just use the Rangeforce platform, they used a number of other resources as well. But what I really like about this case study, and it's not actually mentioned in the video, but it's something I experienced firsthand, was I was on hand to work through the first Cyber Range team exercise with Dataport when we ran it. And I can still say now they are the best team I have seen perform in that environment. The team have gone through the training materials, they've built this up together, they've worked together as a team to learn these skills. And all of those things that were mentioned at the beginning about why this improves team performance, Dataport demonstrated that perfectly to me during that environment. So that brings us to the end of the content. Just one thing to mention before we go into questions, though, is if you want to talk this through any further, you want to have a chat with me about this, I will be at Black Hat, as will some of the other team members in London. I think it's the week of the 4th or 5th of December. We'll be at stand 338. Why not drop by and see us?
Thank you, Scott. And yes, Black Hat is the week of the 4th of December. The exhibit hall is open on the 6th and 7th. And as Scott mentioned, he and some of our other teammates will be there. So if you are going to be there, please let us know. And we would love to make some time to meet up with you. So thank you, Scott. If you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat box or you can chat them directly to us. Scott, just one question that we do have is if you could talk about how to convince your boss that this style of learning that you have been talking about is worth investing in.
Yeah, thank you, Rachel. Well, I guess the key thing is to look at the science. Exactly what I've been doing over the last few weeks whilst building this out, which was looking at that science around the forgetting curve, around spaced repetition, and how that can fit with either what you currently have or with something like the Rangeforce platform that helps break that up into smaller pieces. Again, it's all about each individual as well. It's not a one size fits all. So some people will still like to do a 5-day training course and then work through that material. Some people like to do boot camps. Personally, I much prefer the hands-on approach, but that's to choose between those individuals. But yeah, rely on the science. And if all else fails, as Rachel said, this is being recorded. You can share the webinar as well.
Great, thank you. And I'll just do one last shout out here. We will have another webinar with Scott as well as with another person on our solutions engineering team. And that will be taking place the week after Black Hat on December 13th and 14th about contextualizing cyber threats. So please, if you enjoyed this, or even if you didn't, we would love to see you on the next one. Thank you all for being here and keep an eye out for the recording.